Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day and spending some time with us. I'm Matt Littleton from Microsoft, one of our advanced compliance specialists here, focused largely in our modern workplace, think Office 365, unstructured data environment. Joined today by Dan Gleason, the CTO and co-founder of ActiveCypher, and Mike Quinn, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at ActiveCypher. Jump over to our next slide. We'll set up the agenda here. We've got a kind of action-packed agenda for us today, and also want to frame this up in the light of kind of the current world events that we're in. I mean, so we've got COVID-19 is certainly top of mind for many organizations. It's forcing an operational shift for many organizations as they shift into a remote work scenario, oftentimes at a pace that is accelerated and not what they may have expected or outlined. But Microsoft and our partners are very committed to making sure that we've got the technical solutions to bring forward to allow organizations to execute against this shift and support operations in the new environment. But as our workers and the data moves out and beyond the company perimeter, data security really becomes a paramount concern to organizations and is one of the key things that we're going to be talking about today. So we can go to the next slide, Dan. We'll kind of do the rest of the setup. So not only that data security perspective and world events forcing organizations to change, another key component that organizations need to deal with is the regulatory landscape in which they exist. I mean, so we've got multiple global regulations that everybody has to approach. Key driver on this was GDPR. Several years ago for global organizations, and then also for US-based organizations, things like CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, now increasingly important to organizations. So if we go to the next slide, we can kind of talk about how we as Microsoft fit into that. And our view on compliance is that everything we do sits on a foundation of compliance management. So from those regulatory issues that we see, and we are 200 updates a day from these regulators from around the world, how is it that organizations can handle that? So the value platform that we're trying to bring forward is from an Office 365 perspective, from an Azure perspective, that platform that Microsoft operates, we are operating that platform in compliance with these global regulations. And we're also in an environment where we want to provide explicit guidance and insight to organizations and customers so that they can effectively adopt, deploy, manage, and consume that platform and remain in a compliant state. So building on that foundation from Microsoft. And then on top of that, we've got three pillars: the information protection and governance pillar, insider risk management, and discover and respond. If we go to the next slide, we'll also see at the bottom of this slide, many names that you may be familiar with from a Microsoft solution perspective. Inside information protection and governance, where we're going to spend a bit of time today, that's where our classify, label, protect solutions like Azure Information Protection comes forward, where our data governance solutions live. At Microsoft, we've recently released two brand new features, two new solutions within Insider Risk Management. I mean, so Insider Risk Management itself and Communication Compliance are two solutions that are specifically focused on understanding and bounding risk from insiders. In the Discover and Respond pillar, this is where we have both our core e-discovery and advanced e-discovery capabilities, and then also our advanced audit capability. And then finally, the compliance management foundation on which all of this lies is where you as a customer organization can consume things like Secure Score, Compliance Score, use capabilities like Compliance Manager to have visibility into what's actually happening inside the platform, and then align to those things that you need to be doing to make sure that you are effectively addressing all of these regulatory compliance issues. So for the rest of the session here, we'll be focused primarily on information protection and governance, compliance management. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Dan and Mike, and they can actually step through all of the solutions from Active Cypher that are available to you through the Azure Marketplace. And then we've got time at the end here for some good Q&A with everybody on the session. So Dan and Mike, over to you.
So Matt, thank you for that introduction and also the lead into to the topic. Dan and I are gonna, walk through quite a bit of data, but it's not going to be overwhelmingly deep. So we do hope that the Q&A session brings up some additional issues that folks have. This slide here, we talk about the proactive versus the reactive in the way we approach data security. One of the things that we noticed early on as Dan was developing the product is that very often clients, through my experience, are going through a phase in their business of transformation, but also taking in the security, data security aspects. And as those change and they have to consume more of those, they continue to be very, very reactive. What we looked at was the opportunity to actually turn the table a little bit and go to a proactive state. And we do hear people talk about proactive. What we looked at was the fact that a lot of corporations spend months, if not nearly as many as 2 years, defining all the steps and processes they're going to put in place in order to become a proactive and secure corporation, particularly around their data security, which is pretty much their #1 concern or top of mind for a lot of the C-suite these days. We looked at the proactive aspect of this and said, we're going to allow them to take that 18 to 2 months, 18 months to 2 year time frame and do their diligence. However, we're going to offer the fact that they can have their data secure today through Active Cypher on our File Fortress product, which allows them to basically encrypt the data at the file level, regardless of where it is located, and then pivot to AIP as well as Active Directory and Azure Active Directory to build out the permissions based on security groups and the portfolios of the corporation. This allows us to ensure that the customer now can sit down and finely tune and test certain aspects of all of the things they're doing on the diligence side of this topic in a way that they can always rely on the fact that the data is currently secure. So they're not at risk of losing information as they get ready to try to secure it. When we talk about the product, the File Fortress, when we started this out, we had developed a quantum resilient file security environment, including encryption related to that. The key was we always had to have an eye on compliance because based on CCPA California, GDPR, the New York Shield Act, and others, it really comes down to how secure is the data. If the data is encrypted, thus secure, then the impact of a breach within the corporation is less, within the industry is less, but also to your client base is less. And so we've always worked on that aspect of compliance versus being basically, an outside alternative to the standards. So I'm going to ask Dan to kind of step in, and we're going to kind of go through some of the various aspects of the product.
Thanks, forward. Mike. And thank you for the introduction, Matt. I'm Dan, an architect, CTO, Active Cypher, and I would like to walk you through a little bit about what Matt and Mike kind of alluded to and kind of set the stage to, and this is data protection and compliance. And so our approach to protecting data is that we take an identity-centric file encryption approach, that the identity tied to that data is the relationship that's important to maintain and test that trust every time the file is accessed. So in a zero trust model that's prevalent today in discussions on take the assumption that all the files from the corporate network are on the internet. That's essentially what the zero trust model is dictating, is your files are at risk out there. So they must ask the question every time they're accessed: who are you? Where are you? What device are you on? To know the identity information of that user, what security groups they're in. This ties to the Active Directory membership and security groups in the identity world, so that the file, when protected, does not trust anyone accessing it. And it's a proven model that the identity, authentication, authorization has to be validated, and the device, once validated also, that trust then to look at that data is provided. This trust model is essential to how we build upon the compliance and maintaining that data trust and compliance from spreading and getting out into risk-based escalations with the files out in the wild. So files protected on site and then in transit anywhere in the world with the same protection, that same identity-centric file protection of unstructured data, is core of how we begin protecting the customer data from day one. Our implementation, our deployment method, is one in which we start from the Azure Marketplace and we deploy to the on-premise file server world and connect that on-premise world to the Azure Active Directory tenant of the client, deploying the resources to control the data protection in the client's tenant. Mike, when you're looking at protecting data, and there's options in how you can provide that protection, going out to the client's tenant, providing the resources, the data protection in the client tenant with the keys and that control, is something that's essential to how we build upon putting the trust, the model of trust into the client's tenant. And I was wondering if you could talk on how that aligns with the control of the data, control of how that data gets out into the world, and we monitor and control this.
Yeah, so one of the things that Dan's alluded to, and you can see on this slide, is the fact that we basically fast-tracked a lot of the deployment capabilities that are required to ensure that security, but we actually help deploy a lot of the inherent Microsoft security products that are available in Azure as well. So clients who are doing the migration of the cloud from their on-prem environment, they get that an instantaneous replication of those capabilities up in the cloud. So the first thing we're doing with the information protection is level setting the client that what they have today on-prem will be replicated or suitable in the cloud or even in hybrid environments. And everyone knows today that there isn't just one cloud. It's a multi-cloud world. So the data is going to be going places that for this conversation we would feel would be possibly a differentiator or a risk in security when it would leave Azure. And we know data will leave. So we look at the fact that wherever there is infrastructure, there is data. So what we're looking at is the fact that we provide, as Dan had described, the capability to not only encrypt that data, but actually track that data wherever it goes globally, whether you send it out to an iCloud or it goes out to Box or it goes over to another data center within your organization. What we're looking at is the fact that the customer maintains control of that data, because it's resident in their tenant. So I always look at the tenant as basically being their on-prem environment replicated in the cloud. So they have that full capability to monitor and watch and manage their data and understand where it is. You know, that we are not going to deep dive into certifications and, you know, all of that alignment that goes with that. But basically what we're digging into here is the fact that the client, when they look at the data and they start to move it to desktop devices, remote stations, virtual desktops, mobile devices, the same classifications of that data, labeling of that data, the same permissions that are allowed through Active Directory in your on-prem and in your Azure tenant and your Azure storage are now carried forward with that data to those other locations for the life of that file, not just for a transaction. So this allows that file, permits that file to live anywhere with those permissions and security. Therefore, the client is not constantly trying to find out where those files have gone to and what is the status of them. It is maintained through this process, which Active Cypher, working with Microsoft, has basically enhanced and basically extended those permissions out to the file and travel with the file, again, like we said, to any place in the world where it may be stored or, unfortunately, lost. It doesn't become a risk to the corporations.
Thanks, Mike. What I'd like to do is take an example of, we've talked like technology in, you know, Azure AD, but we need to kind of come up with that story of what does this look like? So in this publicly traded financial firm, the fear of losing the data was hindering their expansion. They didn't want to grow out their remote workforce, remote workers. They centralized as much as they could because of that fear of expansion. And one of the things that we helped with was to get them beyond that fear, because we went in there and quickly had applied the data protection in their Microsoft environment that they were already using. They were already a Microsoft Windows Server shop, AD, they had Azure Active Directory, Office 365, E3 subscriptions. So in an afternoon, we're able to go in and, using some advanced tools, Active Cypher scouting agents, which can go in, look at the Active Directory environment, the file server environment, and check certain lay of the land characteristics that are best practices of Microsoft, having to do with the Active Directory quality, the cleanliness of the Active Directory. And in this case here, this company had set up their Active Directory, the Office 365 environment was all set up correctly. Active Cypher Scout runs through and says the program is ready for install deployment. And we, in an afternoon, deploy to a file server and begin protecting that unstructured data, all the files in the file servers, and we deploy to the local network inside their Active Directory, up into the Azure tenant I had described, into their Azure subscription, all of the key management, the database management, user management, and integration with AD and Azure AD all happens from an installer, a deployment installer, in their local environment on their file server. And in an afternoon, all of the protection, data protection, is deployed and encryption is running on their server. And today, the fear of that expansion is gone. They're able to open up remote offices, remote workers, and they're using both the agent side of our application, File Fortress Agent, on desktop machines, which then there's no user interface, there's no user interaction. The data, once decrypted and available for the user, the user has no indication that they have to interact with that data. There's no retraining of the user. And so the expansion happened unhindered and was really a non-event. And now they're going back and further tuning the compliance and security aspects of it. But immediately that afternoon, their compliance went from totally loose, unstructured data, unprotected on the network, to being a compliant, encrypted AES-256 protected data, and their compliance was immediately at a whole new level. And this was an afternoon, and after 2 years of struggle about what to do with their expansion plans and remote offices, I wanted to bring it to something that was, a real success story.
Yeah, and one of the things to note in this, as Dan's going through this, is we do not have a hardware appliance that anyone has to install. Everything is basically software resident with the the install. And back on that compliance and business as usual aspects. First off, the end users had no idea that this was going on because it's basically a hitless upgrade and integration into the system. So nobody lost any productivity in the process either. And on the compliance side, the key selling point for us was the fact that we could immediately step up to CCPA and GDPR based on their definitions of what a breach is and the impact of that breach if the data was not encrypted or not secure, and what it would be if it was secure and encrypted. And so we were able to show black and white what they were able to gain in that compliance. And again, as Dan stated, they've gone back now working with their partner to basically look at all of those additional aspects of tuning that do not affect the day-to-day operation, do not impact the user, but it helps enhance their compliance and never disrupts their security going forward. So we're very confident that as clients continue to do it, and they are doing as this customer has, this is really designed for ease of use. So what Dan really did was he took a very complex set of operations that need to be taken together, and instead of having them independent, he formulated an architecture that brought them together, orchestrates them, brings them up, and also lights up other features within the Microsoft security realm that clients would normally, we hope, would turn them on eventually, but we bring it to the forefront and get them basically turned on, so the client's getting more of those capabilities for what they've installed in either that E3 or E5 licensing.
That's a good point, Mike. And I just want to clarify that Active Cypher File Fortress is designed to utilize existing Microsoft toolset resources, structures like Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, the SQL database, Microsoft Key Vault. So what I like to say is we're more the water flowing through the pipes of Microsoft. Microsoft has the pipes, the connectors. There's no need for us to bolt on something that, or create new pipes. So what we do is we're leveraging what already exists in shared folder technology, file system technology, Active Directory, as I said, and then providing a secure environment, a secure private cloud for each client. So for every instance of Active Cypher that's installed, the resources being brought up into Azure are the foothold sometimes for the first Azure presence that they've had. There's clients that will have an Office 365 subscription, Azure tenant. They'll be using AD Connect to synchronize users, but they won't have any Azure resources up there. They won't have web apps and databases yet. This is all part of their planned migration, perhaps. When we install, we put the foundations of what a client can also build upon with the SQL database servers, web apps, storage accounts. We have a lot of that structure already there existing for them to then build upon. But in order to start off the deployment, we have to first know the environment is, is squared away. There's every environment in networking is going to have different complexities of tooling and third-party stuff and iterations of people who have come and gone. The older the company, the perhaps more iterations of people who have taken on the role of network support, Active Directory support, as you know. So what happens is we have a tool, Active Cypher Scout, which when deployed will look at the file server, the Active Directory, the Azure Active Directory environment, and test it against patterns and practices, best practices of Microsoft in terms of organizing your security groups and memberships and how your shared folders should be organized, and looking for things that could be risk and compliance issues, things having to do with nesting of security groups, of having users assigned to shared folders. There's a variety of things, hundreds of things that are looked at. And so the Active Cypher Scout is an advanced tool to go into that environment, look at that lay of the land, analyze it, make suggestions if it finds that things are not within the guidance parameters, and in some cases actually heal these things for you. There are certain activities that when we see these things, we'll present them to the user and prompt them for clearing these items up. So Active Cypher Scout is the starting point of deploying Active Cypher File Fortress and making sure that the lay of the land is squared away so that the actual deployment of File Fortress goes through unhindered.
And one other aspect of the Scout is it's not a one and done type tool. As the customer or the partner, you have access to the tool. This is one of those, data security hygiene tools that you would use on a fairly regular basis. You would get it into your SOP because, as Dan stated, a lot of folks are stewards of these environments, and they change. You have adds and deletions of employees. You have acquisitions and mergers. You have partners that need to be in your business. You want to run this tool on a fairly regular basis to keep you aligned and keep you centered on security within these environments, and don't let it get basically out of control. So it has a secondary aspect of it is it doesn't hurt a client to run it on a regular basis.
One second, it's pardon me, went the wrong direction.
That's okay.
So compliance today and tomorrow.
I think we started down a path earlier with Matt on compliance. We're in this COVID-19 environment today. What we're seeing at Active Cypher and has been, in my experience and my previous two employers, always an issue, and that is having a disaster recovery business continuity, more business continuity plan for just about any scenario. Yet here we are today. A lot of corporations don't have a remote architecture even installed. So a lot of carriers are all of a sudden being inundated with corporate requirements for secure connectivity over VPN, MPLS circuits, and those are going to take months to deploy. What we're offering today, as you see with the end-to-end data protection, also basically an end-to-end compliance environment that has a very forward-looking aspect to it. That forward-looking aspect is in relationship to the encryption that we utilize today, which is AES 256, as well as one that has been developed here at Active Cypher, which is basically a quantum resilient architecture for the future, which you will see on our website and other activities we do that talk more about that. Where today we're really kind of lining ourselves up to and staying within our relationship with Microsoft to also accentuate the compliance that Matt's team basically converses with the clients about, but also what Microsoft's doing as a corporation on their products to ensure that compliance is maintained in every aspect of the company. One of the things that we talked about early on in this is that we want to basically stress the fact that our File Fortress and our Scout, they've been available for a few months out on the Azure Marketplace. We are in a co-sell environment with Microsoft sellers, but also with partners. We ourselves are a silver Microsoft partner. One of the things that we are going to request of those who are attending, first off, if you have an opportunity, please make sure you ask questions. We've had that capability throughout this this webinar. We're going to move over to those questions that folks have sent in. Dan has prepared some additional slideware that'll be available to everybody as well once we complete the webinar. That hopefully will help define a little bit more in depth some aspects of what we just recently discussed, but also the fact that we hope it prompted a few more requests for you to kind of step into this type of thought process about being very proactive versus reactive within your businesses. So in our chat, we received a number of questions. We're going to take a second here while I talk to kind of review them and then start to see what we can put together for replies.
I see we have a question here. Is there anything specifically targeted for ITAR compliance? And let's see. It doesn't say who had said that, but I see there's quite a few of them coming in here. Let's see, Mike. There's a couple of questions here about how we install, how we're made available. Let me talk to that one because we have some more compliance information coming up. Let me go to how we deploy because there's a couple people asking this and I don't think that was clarified well. The Active Cypher File Fortress is available in the Azure Marketplace and it's available as a SaaS application needing permission to install into the Azure Active Directory tenant of the client. And that installation into their tenant provides us with details that we create a custom deployment tool for the client that will configure most of the Azure environment, the local file server environment, with no interaction from the end user. We have a discovery process that's able to go through the whole domain registration, discovery of the security groups, memberships, the shared folders, all the Active Directory attributes. So I think what I needed to clarify here is that our installer, our deployment tool, does not require an admin with that knowledge of Active Directory groups and memberships to be able to work interactively with our deployment tool. No. The Active Cypher Scout tool investigates the Active Directory environment first, and then if the environment is clean, then we install without any further guidance. The person with the proper permissions, domain administrator on a file server, running our deployment tool will complete the entire deployment without having to know anything about the Active Directory environment, Azure Active Directory. So this is something that a partner can install. It does not require the advanced Active Directory knowledge. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out, that we handle all of that in the background.
So someone asked a question regarding ITAR. So just to define that a little better from here. So our AES 256 is FIPS 140-2 compliant. So we work through State Department to license this outside the United States, so OCONUS. Currently, we're only selling within the United States. We haven't gone international with this. So on a technical basis on how a software works, we are compliant. As you may read on our website, we deem ourselves socially responsible. We also understand who our clients are. We find a client or someone requesting our product that doesn't meet those requirements as an end user, we will not sell to them as well. I'll let you know that as well.
One of these questions on customer success slide, the publicly traded financial firm, I had said that the installation happened in the afternoon. Someone had asked, well, how much data was processed? And that's a good question, because that leads into the undisturbed environment that you had mentioned earlier, Mike, that our deployment does not disturb an environment. It can happen continually through the workday. So what happens is the deployment of our tooling will go out and begin encrypting, protecting the data, one shared folder at a time. And as it's progressing through these folders and doing the data protection, the users can be still interacting with the data, protected or not. Their workflow doesn't change from accessing files on a shared folder or in a cloud drive, because shared folders will be synchronized to SharePoint, Dropbox, and so forth. And so the protection will go continuously until it's done. So in their case, there were hundreds of millions of files, and that took weeks to catch up on processing hundreds of millions of files. But that afternoon, they were already into the hundreds of thousands of files by the end of the day, because this is a very fast multi-threaded encryption service on the file server.
And the other aspect of this is not only does it encrypt what you historically have on your servers, now everything going forward is encrypted for the client. So it's doing double duty. One, it's taking care of things real time and going forward, and it's doing the archived environment. As Dan said, based on the size, we can't say it's all going to take a day or it's all going to take 2 weeks. Some corporations might take much, much longer. But again, in that proactive versus reactive phase, that's not going to change. You're still going to have to do all that work. We just automated getting it done in such a way that the users are not impacted. They have access to all that data anytime.
Thanks, Mike. Someone's asking about Azure Information Protection, because it says we've referenced File Fortress regarding AIP. Does this work together? And then a follow-up question, does it work with PaaS environments? I'm going to jump forward to a slide here to answer this. In our deployment, this is a screenshot of ActiveCypher File Fortress with the AIP optional deployment. What we do is, as I said, the deployment from the Azure Marketplace into the customer's Azure Active Directory tenant gives us visibility also into subscription information to inquiry. Do they have a subscription that supports AIP? Do they have any policies created for AIP? We look at this information and we're able to see that perhaps they've got a license available because they're using E3 or E5 edition, but there's no policy. So their Azure Information Protection essentially is sitting there not lit up yet. So what we can provide is, during the implementation of our tool, we can look into the tenant and see that, hey, they have a subscription that supports AIP. It's not deployed though. Would you like to have the optional deployment of AIP, so that AIP can work together with our protection of the data to do labeling, classification, as Matt had alluded to early, classify, label, and protect. So we're working in that sequence. So that was one aspect of it. And then the other was the PaaS environments. Let me go to this screenshot here, which is the Active Cypher post Azure deployment. And you can see on the left-hand side, the Active Cypher resource group, and then in the blade of the Active Cypher resource group, you see our resources that are deployed to the customer's tenant. This is post installation. Prior, let me go to the prior view here. Prior to finishing the installation, this is the, you can see there is no Active Cypher resource group here. The installer is just starting. But below here, you see that there's virtual machines. And this is a PaaS environment where we've got the file server, domain controller, workstations up in the environment, and then the platform is installed. The Active Cypher File Fortress is installed. So everything essentially is self-contained up in the cloud. So this is an environment in which they have lifted everything into the cloud. But we'll operate in on-premise only, in which they have an Azure subscription, an Azure tenant. They don't even need to have Office 365 as like a bare bones start. So on-premise hybrid is like our sweet spot, because companies who have a hybrid solution, on-premise mixed Office 365, they maybe have some web apps up there. They don't have all their files up there. We are an excellent migration solution to convert from that local up into the cloud, and even provide then some capabilities that didn't even exist on premise, having to do with remote workforce, Windows Virtual Desktop, and accessing things on Mac, Apple, iPhones, and so forth. Those capabilities are extended by the deployment of our tooling. So when Active Cypher File Fortress is deployed in a hybrid situation, they're essentially able to open up a remote workforce that didn't exist prior to today. So especially COVID-19, this is, a hot topic, right, Mike? How many companies today are like, keep your workers at home? We're sitting here side by side because we're doing the webinar.
but we wouldn't normally be doing this. We'd be home by now.
Right. So, this then can provide that installation and turning on, lighting up an environment that didn't exist the day before. Remote desktop users, Windows Virtual Desktop, providing that accessibility safely in a compliant way to outside users. And the files could be up in the cloud services to remote workers, and knowing that those files are protected no matter where they're accessed, whether these people are at home or locked away in quarantine, that you don't have to worry about the data going out unprotected, the unstructured data.
And one other thing, and you might want to define this better, but during the implementation, we represent ourselves a certain way within the client's environment, but then we basically move ourselves as Active Cypher out of that environment, out of that realm, such that we're not interested, nor do we have the capability to look at your data. What we look at that as our internal compliance is that this is not utilized to look at any data, and that follows along with the policies within Microsoft and any smart corporation that's supporting their clients.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. When you're talking about the compliance piece, let me go ahead and go to a compliance slide here. We talked about coming back to the compliance, and I just want to touch on this for a second. This is the same tenant in which I had shown the previous screenshots of the file fortress being deployed, and then post-deployment with the security center being turned on now. You can see that the policy and compliance score here, relatively low, 410 out of 775. But this is something that can be turned on during the deployment so that you're deploying in an already known security environment, meaning post-installation, you know where you stand. You know what you need to tune from this point here. Do you want to add the multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, conditional access policies? This gives you the ability to apply the coverage across that whole tenant post-installation and know that the network security group and all those resources that we've now deployed on behalf of the customer are all now under the security center and compliance control, so that the partner or the internal IT can then further tune and apply their own compliance and controls on this. So we're not trying to dictate how they need to tune this. We're giving the ability to have a good starting point that they can build upon and easily achieve a higher compliance score, right after the installation.
And the client, again, in this proactive versus reactive conversation, with what Dan just talked about, you have a measure. You can now start to set thresholds as to what is considered basically, good security hygiene or poor, right? You can actually, I'm going to use a hated term in my life, KPIs, to actually understand how your business is running from a security point of view and a compliance point of view, in a way that you could represent this to any auditor, any executive board that wish to see and understand better how you monitor what your business is doing.
All right, let me see if there's a couple more questions.
Yeah, there was one on unclassified.
I saw one on the scouting agent. Does it help evaluate control? Does it help evaluate controlled unclassified information? The scouting agents, they're providing a visibility into the network operating system, file system, Active Directory world of that network. It's not looking at classification of the data. It's not trying to understand what data is on the file servers. We take, an approach where we don't care what type of data it is. It's unstructured data. It could be bin files, ISOs, it could be Word documents. That part doesn't matter. We're going to protect it regardless. So it's not required that the scouting agent is looking at that data and classifying or going through a discovery process with it, because our approach is these shared folders are shared up from this root here to the users and groups of the environment. We need to protect those and make sure that we understand, are they set up correctly? Have the Active Directory permissions been applied correctly, and so forth. So the AC Scout is really to understand the AD and file system environment, not the data, not the understanding of the data.
One last thing regarding that government tenant. Our belief at Active Cypher is that this product is certified to run in government tenants, but I'm going to ask that you reach out to your Microsoft team to confirm that, because we don't know what Microsoft's allowing or not allowing, but we know its capability is there. So hopefully that's a partial answer. Now there were some questions, some additional questions that were sent in as well. We just got to try and track them down. This thing has scrolled off the screen for us.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, so Mike and Dan, this is Matt.
Matt,
questions that we've got there. I mean, as I listen to the discussion, a couple things from the customer perspective that really resonate, kind of three key thematic takeaways that I've gotten on this. One is the speed of market. Many customers don't have the people, they may not have the process set up, and they certainly don't have the time to actually execute against some of this. So the ability to do this in a very rapid fashion, I think, is a kind of key differentiator there. Second theme is really that this is additive to existing capability that customers may already have under license, and want to come back to that in a second. And then the third kind of key theme is that this is an ongoing process, that you create a call it an envelope or a security posture, security state, and then sustain that moving forward is really important. But back to that additive, to existing capability question, are there actual, Microsoft licensing requirements for your solution to deploy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, the licensing requirements for the resources that we deploy have to be provided by the client or partner. So we don't get in the middle of the consumption. When we deploy from the file server, we allow the client to select their tenant that they're deploying into, and then select the subscription that they want the resources charged against. So if it's an EA, they would pick the enterprise agreement, different, pay-as-you-go and so forth. If it's a partner subscription, then they would choose that, and then the partner would invoice for those resources. So we don't become entangled in what resources and SKUs are deployed. What we do is, if the resource does not exist, we're going to deploy it. Meaning, if the SQL database server exists, we'll put the database up there. You're not paying twice for two servers. So we do a respectful deployment in that we're not redundant to already existing things, with the caveat of that they're not already secured off into their own network security group, that this is something that's of the general security group. So I just wanted to point that out also, that Matt, that you touch on that with the pricing. There's the licensing, which goes to the subscription, and then for like optional things like the AIP, for a person that has an E3 or E5 subscription, all the file protection and labeling, document tracking and revocation, classification, the FCI connector, file classification infrastructure, and AIP file scanner and labeling, all of those features are available, in AIP for post deployment. So on our optional deployment, after the AIP piece is installed, everything except for hold your own key is part of that base licensing. I hope that answered what you were touching on there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you've touched on it previously, but I think it's valid to go back and kind of really land the message. What's the data that you're actually going after and protecting? Is this all on-prem? Is it all cloud? Is it both? Just being really clear for everybody with the takeaway on where is it that the data you're touching, what is it that you're going to cover?
That's fair. I have I keep saying file server as a reference, but a file server is just words referencing that this thing could physically exist on premise, but it may be a part of a cluster, a distributed file system, DFS. It could be Azure File Services. So we integrate with Azure File Services and file servers so that you could have, this could be a complete cloud environment with a file server VM, Azure File Sync Services. It could be Azure File Services with SMB endpoints. So we support even a file server that may be, in fact, Azure File Services with SMB using the AD domain services that are now available, so that the authentication, authorization to Azure File Services over SMB happens through the domain services. So that can be a complete cloud strategy. It could be a distributed cloud strategy in which they have a hybrid arrangement from the cloud going out to other cloud providers. SharePoint and OneDrive could have synchronization endpoints to Azure File Services or to the file server. And we will provide the protection to all those files as they are on the cloud providers. So does that clear it up that once protected at the source, no matter what cloud provider those files end up at, they're still under that same control? that same protection schema.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And as a solution that can be acquired, through the Azure Marketplace, one of the next kind of natural questions that will flow out of that from a customer perspective is, what's the support model, from Active Cypher around all of the capabilities? I don't think we really talked to that.
Yeah, that's very good. We rely on the partners in the channel to provide that interaction that they already have with their clients. They're going to understand their network environment best, and so we're not trying to get in there and say, look, we have services, and we're going to tell people how their environment should be. No, because that's what extends all of these engagements to begin with, is that shuffle of consultants coming in or providers. So we rely on the solution provider that's already got the relationship, already understands that network, and then we provide that expert support of, okay, you have some Active Directory domain sharing going on that's maybe non-standard. Let's talk about it. We can help you. So we provide that second level, third level, down to the detail, to really then provide them the guidance, the feedback of, here's best suggestions. And a lot of times we're providing docs.microsoft.com reference material, not our own, because most of what has to be taken care of has to do with, like I said, patterns and practices of Microsoft. So we'll be sending them Azure AD, maybe AD Connect information on password hash sync or whatever it is that might be stopping that company from achieving their goal, which should be the protection of the data. So like I say, we're not a services organization at all, getting in there and advising or consulting. We are there to support and provide our guidance, and which is really coming from the best practices of Microsoft, because that's where the data protection works best, when everything is configured to flow within the, like I say, the water and the pipes of Microsoft. Okay.
Great, and I think that's an adjunct. We've got just a couple minutes left, and another question has come in on, does this replace the IP scanner? And my view of this is, we're going after different objectives there. Whereas AIP scanner is all about understanding and discovering and what the data is, and then making a decision on either I'm going to manually classify this or potentially automatically classify it. My view is, from the Active Cypher side of the house, is I'm going to point at whatever you give me and I'm going to protect it.
That's correct.
And it's agnostic.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they're both doing a job in the data classification area for the client, but they're not. One doesn't replace the other. So hey, we're also going to see that the clock's running out here. A couple of things. First off, answers to these questions, as well as other questions that come in, we will answer in writing, and we will work with the webinar management team to get those out to everyone involved. From the File Fortress side, we want to thank Microsoft for hosting this webinar and setting it up, and also thank you, the clients, customers, partners, and friends who are out there, for attending. Would love to get some feedback from you. We want to improve these going forward, but also we want to take a special moment to thank Matt Littleton for taking time out of his busy schedule to both work with us in advance of this and basically host the introduction as well as the interaction on behalf of Microsoft and the clients with questions and answers. I want to thank Dan for being brilliant and knowing all of this and having the time to come and share this. There will be future webinars that we will put together with Microsoft, so we look forward to those. Dan and Matt, anything to say?
Well, thank you, Mike. That was a very good wrap up. And I also would like to thank Matt and Microsoft for providing this platform for us and working together with us.
Yep, great stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Have a great day.
Okay.